In the busy streets of Lagos, Amelie turned her back on Tay, her loyal and hard-working husband. Tay had little, only his small business and his quiet dreams, but he gave her love and respect. Still, Amelie's eyes were fixed on glitter, not loyalty. She chose Chief Obinna, a wealthy man with flashy cars and promises of a golden life. Soon she was living in mansions, wearing diamonds, attending high-society parties, and laughing at the man she once called her husband. She mocked Tay as small and useless, believing she had traded up to something greater. But behind the gates of wealth, her new life was not as perfect as it seemed. Chief Obinna was cruel, unfaithful, and controlling. He treated Amelie not as a partner but as property, reminding her every day that her worth depended on him. While she was sinking, far away Tay was rising. He took his heartbreak and poured it into his small business. Day and night he worked until his brand unexpectedly grew across Nigeria, then Africa. From a simple shop, he built an empire, earning respect and admiration. Meanwhile, Amelie's golden world shattered. Obinna's empire fell into scandal, his riches vanished, and her rich friends abandoned her. Homeless and broken, she crossed paths with Tay again, but now he was a billionaire, standing tall with a loyal wife and powerful allies by his side. Amelie begged for forgiveness, but Tay only walked away. Left in the same poverty she once mocked, Amelie became a forgotten shadow, while Tay stood as a symbol of dignity, success, and karma's justice. Amelie's new life sparkled like a dream. In Lagos, people whispered her name as she stepped out of shining cars, dressed in the latest designs, dripping with gold and diamonds. She posed in front of glass mansions and marble staircases, her photos filling social media, where she smiled with her new man, Chief Obinna. Expensive champagne flowed at the high-society parties she now attended, where laughter echoed and camera flashes followed her every move. Amelie carried herself like a queen, waving off the past as if it never existed. She would tell her new circle of friends how she once lived with a man who could barely afford rent. With a sharp tongue, she mocked Tay, calling him small and useless, as though the years of his hard work and his quiet love had meant nothing. She said he was a man with no future, a man too ordinary for a woman like her. Each word of insult was like a knife, but Tay remained silent, refusing to respond. While Amelie bathed in luxury, she never saw the shadows growing around her. Chief Obinna was rich, yes, but his wealth was built on arrogance and cruelty. He gave her diamonds but also sharp words that cut deeper than glass. He gave her mansions but locked her in with rules, reminding her she belonged to him. At parties, he flaunted other women, laughing in her face as if her feelings were nothing. Still, Amelie pushed these cracks aside, drowning in the glitter of her lifestyle, blind to the storm waiting ahead. She laughed at Tay from afar, certain she had won, certain that money was stronger than love or dignity. Yet somewhere in the city, Tay was quietly working, carrying her insults in his chest, turning his pain into fire. She could not imagine that the man she called small was slowly building something bigger than all the riches Obinna paraded. The more Amelie shone, the more she mocked, believing she had escaped the life of poverty forever. She forgot that glitter can fade, and gold can turn to dust. She had traded loyalty for luxury, but her laughter at Tay's struggle would one day return to her as an echo she could not silence. For now, though, Amelie lived in her world of jewels and flashing lights, blind to the truth that every kingdom built on pride eventually falls. At first, Amelie thought she had won the life every woman dreamed of. The cars, the jewels, the grand mansion with fountains and chandeliers, it all looked perfect on the outside. She told herself she had finally escaped the days of struggling with Tay, the man she once called small. But little by little, the shine on her new world began to fade. Behind the golden doors of the mansion, Chief Obinna was not the charming man who had swept her off her feet. He was cold, proud, and cruel. His smile at parties was only for the cameras, and once the guests left, his words became knives. He reminded Amelie that everything she had was his, that without him she was nothing. He controlled the way she dressed, the way she spoke, even the people she could meet. Every step she took had to please him. At night, when Amelie expected warmth, she found herself alone. Chief Obinna would disappear for hours, sometimes days, returning with the smell of perfume that was not hers. He flaunted other women openly, making her feel small and powerless. If she complained, his anger was sharp, his voice louder than thunder, his threats heavy like chains. Amelie, who once mocked Tay for being useless, now found herself treated like furniture in a house that did not feel like home. She had jewels on her neck but bruises on her heart. The mansion walls that once made her proud now felt like a cage. She had traded freedom for wealth, love for control, and every day it was clearer that she had made a terrible mistake. Yet Amelie kept up the act for the world to see. On social media, she smiled in her gowns, posted pictures of vacations, and showed off the gifts Obinna bought after his cruel words. She laughed at parties, pretending her life was a fairy tale. But when the music ended, she cried alone, wiping her tears before anyone noticed. The same friends who once cheered her lifestyle were blind to her pain. They only saw the glitter and the diamonds, not the emptiness inside. Slowly, Amelie began to understand that she was not a queen in Obinna's world, she was property. She was a trophy he displayed when he wanted to shine, and a shadow he ignored when he was done. No matter how beautiful she looked, no matter how much she tried to please him, it was never enough. The promises of happiness he once whispered had turned into chains of fear and silence. Amelie remembered Tay sometimes, the man who never raised his voice, the man who believed in hard work and loyalty. She laughed at him once, but now she realized he had given her something Obinna never could, peace. But by then, it was too late. She was trapped in a golden prison, living in fear of a man who owned her life. The glitter had turned to dust, and the dream she chased had become her biggest nightmare. While Amelie was busy showing off her glittering life, far away Tay was walking a very different road. When she left him, it broke his heart, but instead of drowning in sorrow, he turned his pain into fuel. Every insult she threw at him, every time she called him small and useless, became fire inside him. He woke up before the sun, worked late into the night, and poured his soul into the little shop he had once started with shaky hands. Day by day, he learned, improved, and refused to give up. He had no fancy cars, no rich friends, no one clapping for him, but he had focus and determination. Slowly, people began to notice his honesty and the quality of his work. Customers kept coming back, and his small business started to grow. At first, it was just one shop turning into 2, then 3, then a warehouse. Soon, distributors wanted his products, banks wanted to partner with him, and his name began to spread across Lagos. Tay stayed humble, keeping his head down, but his business kept rising like a storm no one could stop. While Amelie laughed at parties, Tay was in dusty offices, signing deals that would change his future. While she posed in diamonds, he was negotiating contracts that stretched across Nigeria. Slowly but surely, his small dream became a nationwide empire. What shocked everyone most was how fast it happened. One moment people saw Tay as the quiet man Amelie abandoned, and the next, his company was on billboards, in magazines, and in the news. From food to clothing to real estate, he expanded carefully, and everything he touched seemed to grow. Investors lined up, and soon he became a symbol of resilience and success. People whispered his name with respect, calling him the man who turned heartbreak into power. He never responded to Amelie's insults, never boasted, never showed bitterness, he just worked, and the results spoke louder than any words. Deep inside, Tay carried the memory of her betrayal, but instead of letting it destroy him, he built something bigger than even Amelie could imagine. He became an employer of thousands, lifting families out of poverty, helping communities, and winning awards for his achievements. The same man once mocked as useless was now creating jobs, feeding homes, and inspiring young people across Africa. His pain had transformed into purpose, and his scars became the reason for his strength. By the time Amelie's golden life was beginning to crack, Tay was already soaring far above. He was no longer the man she left behind, he was now a powerful figure, respected not just for his wealth but for his humility and dignity. And the most beautiful part of his journey was that he never chased revenge. He didn't need to prove Amelie wrong with words. His success itself became the loudest answer. The man she had called small had silently risen to become larger than life, and the world could not stop clapping for him. Amelie's golden life did not last forever. What once looked like a fairy tale began to fall apart piece by piece. Chief Obinna, the man she thought was untouchable, suddenly became the center of a storm. News spread across Lagos that his empire was built on lies, fraud, and dirty deals. Government agents raided his offices, banks froze his accounts, and the same newspapers that once praised him now dragged his name through mud. Headlines screamed scandal, corruption, betrayal. The mansions that Amelie once flaunted were seized, the cars were taken away, and the jewels she wore proudly were now reminders of a life built on shaky ground. The world that once admired her glamorous photos turned on her overnight. Amelie's so-called friends were the first to vanish. The same women who once clapped for her, who sipped champagne by her side, stopped answering her calls. The men who used to shower her with compliments no longer wanted to be seen near her. At parties, her name became a joke, her face a warning. Social media, where she once boasted about her perfect life, now mocked her with cruel comments. She scrolled through the insults late at night, her hands shaking, her tears falling on the phone screen. The world that had once cheered her glitter now celebrated her fall. Chief Obinna grew colder. With his empire collapsing, his anger turned toward Amelie. He shouted, blamed, and finally abandoned her when she had nothing left to offer him. The man who once promised her the world now walked away without looking back. Left with no money, no roof, no protection, Amelie discovered how fragile her golden kingdom truly was. She begged old friends for help, but doors slammed in her face. She tried to sell her expensive clothes, but nobody wanted them. Slowly, hunger and shame became her companions. Amelie wandered the same streets she once mocked, dressed no longer in diamonds but in faded clothes. The same people she used to laugh at now laughed at her. She remembered how she once called Tay small and useless, yet now she was the one who felt invisible, forgotten, and broken. Every insult she had thrown at him echoed back, louder than ever, as if life itself was punishing her. She had traded love and dignity for wealth, and now both were gone. Her reflection in the mirror was no longer the proud woman who posed in glittering gowns. Instead, she saw a shadow of herself, tired eyes, trembling hands, and a heart full of regret. The same world that lifted her high had pushed her down, and there was no one left to catch her. Amelie, once the queen of luxury, now stood alone in the ashes of her golden dream, watching her empire crumble into dust. And deep inside, she knew this was only the beginning of her true fall. Amelie's life had turned into a nightmare she could not wake up from. The once sparkling queen of parties was now wandering the streets of Lagos with nothing but shame and regret in her heart. The mansions were gone, the cars were gone, and even her so-called friends had vanished. She had no roof, no food, and no one to run to. Nights were cold, and days were long as she begged for help that never came. The woman who once mocked poverty was now living in it, with the harsh reality pressing down on her like a heavy stone. She had lost everything, but the worst loss was her dignity. One hot afternoon, while walking aimlessly, Amelie saw a crowd gathered around shining cars parked outside a luxury hotel. Reporters were snapping photos, fans were screaming, and cameras flashed like fireworks. Curious, she pushed through the crowd, and then her heart stopped. Standing tall, dressed in a sharp suit, surrounded by security and business leaders, was Tay. The same Tay she once abandoned. But this was not the Tay she knew. This was a new man, a billionaire, admired across Africa, respected in boardrooms, and celebrated as a symbol of hope. People whispered his name with honor, Tay, the empire builder. He shook hands with presidents and inspired young people with his story of rising from nothing. Amelie's knees weakened as she watched him smile, a smile full of confidence, peace, and strength. He looked powerful, yet humble, the kind of man she once believed he could never be. She remembered the days she mocked him, calling him small and useless, and the memory burned her like fire. Now, the man she threw away had become everything she once desired, and she had nothing left. Tears filled her eyes as she pushed closer, desperate to speak to him. For a moment, their eyes met. Tay saw her, standing in the same torn clothes she once mocked on others, her face pale with shame, her body thin from struggle. She tried to smile, tried to raise her hand, but the words froze in her throat. Around him, powerful allies stood, clapping for his success, while a graceful woman, his new wife, held his hand with pride. Amelie could see love in their eyes, the kind of love she once had but threw away for gold. The crowd cheered louder, drowning her voice, and in that moment, Amelie felt invisible. She wanted to call his name, to fall at his feet and beg for forgiveness, but her legs refused to move. The distance between them was no longer just physical, it was a wall built from choices, pride, and karma. Tay, now larger than life, walked past her with calm dignity, without a word. And Amelie, standing in the dust of her ruined life, realized she had lost not just a man, but the only chance at true happiness she ever had. Amelie could not hold back her tears anymore. The moment she saw Tay shining like a king, her heart broke into pieces. Memories of the past rushed back, the little home she once shared with him, the warm meals he struggled to provide, the gentle words he spoke when she was upset. She remembered how he once held her hand with love and promised a future built on hard work. She had thrown all of that away for Chief Obina's glitter. Now, standing in rags, hungry and desperate, she wished she could turn back time. That night she gathered courage and decided to approach Tay. The next day, she waited outside his office, trembling like a leaf. Cameras flashed as Tay stepped out, tall and confident, surrounded by his security and business partners. Amelie fell to her knees in front of the whole crowd. People gasped as they watched the once glamorous Amelie crawling on the ground, her voice shaking. "Tay, please forgive me," she cried. "I was blind. I didn't see your worth. Give me one more chance." Her tears fell onto the pavement, her hands clinging to his shoes like a drowning woman grabbing at anything to survive. The scene drew attention, and whispers spread quickly. Some pitied her, but many shook their heads, remembering how she once mocked him. But Tay did not bend. He looked down at her, not with anger, but with calm strength. Standing beside him was his new wife, a graceful woman who had stood by him during his rise. She held his hand firmly, her eyes filled with loyalty and love. Powerful allies surrounded him, businessmen, politicians, and friends who respected him deeply. Tay gently freed his foot from Amelie's grip and spoke in a steady voice. "Amelie, the past is gone. I gave you my love once, and you threw it away. Today, I have peace, I have family, and I have respect. I cannot go back." His words cut deeper than any insult, because they were true. Amelie's sobs grew louder as she begged, but Tay did not waver. He turned to his wife with a soft smile, showing the world that his heart now belonged to someone who truly valued him. The crowd erupted in applause, not for Amelie's tears, but for Tay's strength and dignity. Reporters captured every moment, and within hours, the story was everywhere, the once broken man standing tall, while the woman who mocked him crawled in regret. Amelie stayed on the ground long after Tay left, her cries swallowed by the noise of the city. She realized too late that forgiveness was not hers to claim. Tay had moved on, and life had already written a new story for him. He was no longer the small man she abandoned, he was a giant, and she was nothing more than a shadow of her own mistakes. Amelie's life slowly faded into silence. After Tay walked away, the world no longer cared about her. The friends who once cheered her name had long forgotten her. The mansions, cars, and parties were only memories that stung like open wounds. She now lived among the same poverty she once mocked, walking the same dusty streets where she once laughed at others. She stood in food lines, hoping for a plate, and slept in corners where no one noticed her. The same woman who once sparkled in diamonds was now invisible, just another face in the crowd. People whispered about her downfall for a while, but soon even those whispers died, and Amelie became forgotten. Meanwhile, Tay's story only grew brighter. His empire stretched beyond Nigeria, across Africa, and even to the world stage. He was celebrated not only for his wealth but for his humility and the way he uplifted others. Universities invited him to speak, leaders shook his hand with pride, and young people carried his story like a torch of hope. He was no longer just a man but a symbol, proof that dignity, patience, and hard work could outshine betrayal and pain. Wherever he went, people stood to clap, not only for his success but for the way he carried it with grace. The contrast could not be clearer. Amelie, who once mocked him as small and useless, now lived in the very dust she once despised. Tay, the man she abandoned, had risen to heights no one thought possible. In the end, life wrote its own justice, she was left with regret, and he became a living example of karma's truth. Amelie faded into the shadows, while Tay's name continued to shine like a star across the continent.